Loaned my uncle $8,000 to save his business. A month later, he was throwing a party in Ibiza with my money. It was a typical Wednesday when my phone buzzed, a call from Uncle Dean. At 45, he was the life of the party, the uncle who always had a story, always seemed to be living on the edge of something big, even though he never quite got there. He was that guy at family gatherings, laughing too loud, telling exaggerated tales of his close calls with success, yet somehow always scraping by month after month, paycheck to paycheck. We all knew it, but no one said it. He was the fun uncle, the one everyone loved to hang around with, even if his financial situation was a running joke. But this time, when I picked up, I could barely recognize his voice. There was no excitement, no charm. It was shaky, cracked with panic. "Aaron, I need your help," he said. "My business, it's crashing. I'm behind on everything. Rent for the shop, the apartment, I'm a month from being evicted. I don't know who else to turn to." It took me a moment to process what he was saying. Uncle Dean, the man who once built me a custom laptop when I couldn't afford one, was now calling me, asking for help. "I need $8,000, he continued, desperation creeping into his voice. "It's just for a short time, man. I swear, I'll pay you back as soon as things get better. This is all I need to get the business back on track." I paused. There were 1,000 red flags waving in my face, but the part of me that remembered all the times he had come through for me was louder. When I was struggling with college, he helped me. When I couldn't even afford textbooks, he'd find a way. He always had my back, and now he was asking for mine. I hated to admit it, but I couldn't say no. Maybe I was naive, maybe I trusted him too much, but the thought of letting him down didn't sit well with me. "I'll send the money," I told him, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I want it in writing, Dean. I need some security here." He promised. We signed a simple agreement online, nothing fancy, just enough to protect both of us. I transferred the money to his account, feeling the weight of my decision. My savings, hard-earned from years of working part-time jobs through college, were now in his hands. I just hoped I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. For the first few days, I received thank you texts. He said he was already seeing progress, that he could feel his business turning around. Then, as the days went by, the messages got shorter. By the end of the week, they stopped completely. I wasn't too worried at first. After all, things were hectic. His business was on the brink of collapse, so it made sense he'd be too busy to check in. But then I saw it. My stomach sank. The first few days after I sent Dean the money, everything seemed to be going according to plan. I received text messages from him almost daily, each one filled with optimism and gratitude. "You saved my business, Aaron. I'm getting things back on track already," he'd text. "I've got some contracts coming through. I'll be back on my feet in no time, and I'll pay you back faster than I promised." I kept the messages, relieved that I had helped him. But as the days turned into a week, the messages started to dwindle. At first, I wasn't concerned. Dean was always busy, always running around with something urgent. Maybe his business was taking longer to get back on track than he'd anticipated. Still, it was strange how quickly he went from thanking me daily to nothing. I shrugged it off, telling myself that he was probably just busy. But then, something happened that made my stomach drop. It was a Sunday morning when I got a message from Rachel, my cousin. She had never been shy about calling out family members, so when I saw her name flash on my phone, I knew something was off. She didn't waste time getting to the point. "Is this for real, or is Dean messing with you?" she asked, and attached a screenshot. The screenshot made my heart race. It was a post from Uncle Dean's Instagram, clear as day, a picture of him lounging by a sparkling blue pool, an expensive cocktail in hand. He was wearing designer sunglasses, flashing a grin that could fool anyone into thinking he was living the high life. Behind him, there was a luxury car parked in front of a 5-star hotel. The caption read, "Living life. #blessed #vacation time." I couldn't believe it. Dean, my uncle, the one who had claimed he was on the brink of losing everything, was partying in Ibiza with my money. The disbelief hit me hard. My mind raced through 100 possibilities, each more absurd than the last. But there it was, proof. Clear as day. I sat there in silence for a moment, staring at the screen. My first impulse was to call him out, to confront him immediately. But then I remembered what I'd learned from years of watching people lie their way through life. I wasn't going to be reckless. I was going to handle this carefully. Instead of acting out of anger, I took a deep breath and started documenting everything. I took screenshots of his Instagram posts, saved every message, and began organizing my thoughts. I dug through my old texts with him and pulled up the signed loan agreement. I had everything: bank transfers, text conversations, the notarized contract, even the photos Dean had sent me showing his failing business. I knew this wasn't just a moment of poor judgment. No, this was betrayal on a scale I wasn't ready for. But I wasn't going to let my emotions cloud my judgment. I was playing the long game now, and the pieces were falling into place. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. As the days went by, the weight of what I had uncovered began to settle in. Dean's story wasn't just a half-truth, it was a complete lie. I couldn't shake the thought of how easily I had been duped, how my trust had been so casually shattered by someone I thought I could rely on. I dug deeper. The more I looked into his so-called business, the more the truth came to light. I found that Dean's computer repair shop had been closed for months. There was no business, no big contracts coming in. It had all been a facade. He had been subletting the space to others, pretending to run the shop while pocketing the rent from his tenants and living the high life with my money. I could feel my anger building as I connected the dots. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. Dean had a history, a pattern of taking advantage of people's kindness. And now it was my turn to expose him. Then Rachel, ever the truth-teller, sent me another bombshell. She'd managed to get in touch with Dean's ex-wife, Sarah, and what she had to say shook me to my core. Sarah revealed that Dean had pulled the same stunt before. One time, he'd borrowed $10,000 from her family, claiming it was for an emergency surgery. But instead of paying for his supposed medical procedure, he'd taken the money to Las Vegas for a gambling trip. Sarah had been embarrassed for years, too ashamed to speak out, but now she saw that the cycle needed to end. The evidence was stacking up faster than I could process it. I had the Instagram posts, the messages, the loan agreement, and now I had Sarah's testimony. This wasn't just about my money anymore. This was about stopping Dean from continuing his pattern of exploitation. I was done being the naive nephew. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I knew what I had to do. I had all the proof, all the ammunition I needed. I couldn't just sit on it any longer. I took a deep breath, and without hesitation, I opened the family group chat. I uploaded everything: screenshots of his Instagram stories, text messages, the signed loan agreement, and the damning conversation with Sarah. Within seconds, the chat exploded. Family members reacted with a mixture of disbelief, anger, and betrayal. Some were shocked by the sheer audacity of Dean's actions, while others, including my grandmother, who had always defended him, were silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke up, her voice trembling. I knew something was off, but I never imagined it was this bad. I sat there for a moment, watching the messages pour in, reading each one carefully. My heart raced, but I felt a sense of calm, a quiet power. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one trying to make sense of what was happening, I was the one in control. And it felt good. I wasn't done yet. I knew there was more to uncover, but for now, I had done what needed to be done. Dean couldn't lie his way out of this. Not anymore. Before we dive deeper into how this all unfolded, How Dean tried to damage control while scrambling for a way out. Let me take a moment to ask you, my incredible viewers, have you ever felt the sting of betrayal from someone close to you? If you've ever had to confront someone who took advantage of your trust, hit that like button. And don't forget to share where you're watching from, drop a flag in the comments, because this journey is just heating up, and I can't wait to share what happens next. As the truth began to spread through the family, the atmosphere shifted from shock to chaos. It was as if I had set off a bomb, and now everyone was scrambling to pick up the pieces. Some of my relatives sided with me, their anger palpable as they digested the evidence I had shared. They couldn't believe that Dean, someone they had once trusted so implicitly, had been lying and stealing for years. But then there were others, especially Dean's mother, my grandmother, who was still trying to justify his actions. She called me, her voice shaky, pleading with me to let it go, to keep the family together and not ruin everything over a small mistake. "Tommy, you're making a huge mistake," she said. "Dean's been through a lot. Maybe he was wrong, but his family. You can't just tear everything apart like this." Her words stung, but I knew what I had to do. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about holding Dean accountable for years of manipulation and deceit. This time, I wasn't going to back down. Then came the bombshell. My grandmother, who had always been one of Dean's biggest defenders, finally admitted something that shook me to my core. She told me that years ago, Dean had come to her asking for money to make a business investment, a risky venture that would supposedly double her retirement fund. He promised her that everything was going to be fine. But as it turned out, he had used the money for his own personal expenses, and she never saw a penny of it again. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I was embarrassed," she confessed. "I thought he was just going through a rough patch, and I didn't want anyone to know. But now, seeing all of this, I can't defend him anymore." Her confession hit me harder than I expected. The truth was unfolding, and with every piece of it, Dean's image shattered further. It wasn't just me he had betrayed, it was the entire family. The word of Dean's scam spread quickly, reaching beyond the family circle. One of his former business contacts reached out to me, revealing that Dean had been fabricating business contracts to cover up his lies. He had never been as successful as he had made himself out to be. In fact, his so-called business deals were nothing more than smoke and mirrors, designed to keep his financial house of cards from collapsing. It was all a facade, one I had been blind to, just like everyone else. I knew then that I couldn't let this go. I had to act. The money wasn't the issue anymore. This was bigger than that. It was about justice. I was done being the victim in this story. I was going to take control, and that meant holding Dean accountable through the legal system. I filed a case against him in small claims court. Armed with all the evidence, text messages, Instagram posts, the loan agreement, and Sarah's testimony, I knew the law was on my side. I wasn't just some naive nephew anymore. I was a man who had fought for what was right, and now I was going to see it through. The moment I filed the case, Dean's desperation hit a new level. He texted me, a message full of excuses and pleading. "Tommy, come on, you've got to be kidding. It's all a misunderstanding. You're blowing this out of proportion. We're family, don't let this destroy us." I didn't respond immediately. I just stared at the message, letting the anger simmer beneath the surface. He still didn't get it. He still thought he could talk his way out of this. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. I replied with a single, concise message: all future communication will be handled through legal channels. And just like that, I cut the final thread of any hope he had of manipulating me further. I wasn't going to be a pawn in his game anymore. Now it was time for him to face the consequences. The pieces were in place, and I wasn't backing down. Before we dive into how this all played out, how Dean's last-ditch efforts to weasel his way out of the situation crumbled under the weight of his own lies, I want to hear from you, my incredible viewers. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when someone you trusted tried to take advantage of you? Drop a like if you've ever been forced to fight for what's right, and let me know where you're watching from, because this story is just getting started, and I can't wait to share what happens next. The day of the court hearing arrived, and with it came a wave of tension that I couldn't shake. I had prepared myself for what was about to happen, but as I sat there in the waiting room, I couldn't help but wonder how Dean would react. Would he finally take responsibility, or would he try to talk his way out of it one last time? When he finally walked in, I could barely believe what I was seeing. Dean was late, of course, and when he did arrive, he was unprepared, no documents, no defense, nothing to back up the story he had been feeding me for weeks. It was clear he had underestimated me, assuming that I would cave once the pressure mounted. The judge called the case to order, and Dean tried to downplay everything. He smiled nervously and made a half-hearted attempt to justify his actions. The trip to Dubai, he began, wasn't what it looked like. It was a business opportunity. I had to make connections, you know? It's how I stay afloat. When the judge raised an eyebrow and asked about his social media posts, those very posts where he had boasted about spending money like it was going out of style, Dean quickly waved them off. That was just a joke, he said, as though brushing it off could make everything go away. Aaron knows I have a sense of humor. The judge wasn't buying it. She didn't flinch when Dean's excuses started to unravel. She glanced at the evidence, everything from the loan agreement to the bank transfers, the text messages, and the Instagram screenshots, and she made her decision swiftly. "Aaron, I'm ruling in your favor," she said, her voice firm. "Dean, you'll be required to pay the full amount plus court costs." In that moment, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about justice. It was about proving that no matter how many lies someone tells, they will eventually be held accountable. Dean's reaction was nothing short of explosive. He stormed out of the courtroom, kicking over a chair in the process, shouting insults as he went. "You think this is over? You'll regret this." "This is just the beginning," he yelled, but I didn't flinch. His tantrums no longer had any power over me. The aftermath was just as intense as the courtroom itself. The family was stunned. Some of them still couldn't believe that Dean, their own flesh and blood, had been so deceitful. Others, like my grandmother, were too ashamed to even speak to him after everything had come out. The day after the court ruling, I received a voicemail from Dean. His voice was cracked, raw with emotion, as he begged for my forgiveness. "Tommy, I'm sorry, man. I was wrong. I made a huge mistake. Please, just talk to me. I'll make it right. I'll pay you back. I swear." His words were laced with desperation, but there was something in his voice that made it clear he was only sorry because he had been caught. Not because he had learned anything. Not because he had changed. And that was the final nail in the coffin for me. I didn't reply. Instead, I shared the court decision with the rest of the family, making sure everyone knew how it had ended. There would be no more sympathy for Dean. No more chances. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. But Dean wasn't done yet. In a last-ditch effort to salvage his reputation, he created a GoFundMe campaign, claiming he was a victim of family betrayal and needed help to pay off his debts. He posted old pictures of him helping me with my laptop, trying to paint himself as the generous uncle who had been wronged. It didn't take long for the family to see it. We all mass-reported his campaign, and within hours, GoFundMe took it down. His last attempt at playing the victim had backfired spectacularly. I watched it all unfold, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. It had taken everything in me to get to this point, and while I was glad to see Dean finally getting what he deserved, part of me couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. Standing up to family is never easy, but sometimes it's the only thing you can do. Justice doesn't always come wrapped up neatly with a bow. It's messy, it's painful, and it takes time. But in the end, you have to do what's right. Dean's actions didn't just hurt me, they hurt the entire family. And while this chapter has closed, I know that the emotional scars will take longer to heal. But one thing is certain, I'm not the same person I was when this all began. And neither is Dean. Before we end, I want to know your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand your ground against a family member who took advantage of you? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you believe in standing up for what's right. The journey may be over, but the lessons learned will stay with me forever.